Hello and welcome to When Grooms Get Engaged, the podcast about a guy's perspective to wedding planning from two guys that are currently trying to survive their own. I'm Steve.
And I'm Chris. And each week we will talk about how we navigated a different part of the wedding planning journey, what we learned in the process, and what maybe we wish we had done differently. So, Steve, what are we talking about this week? And how many Pinterest boards did you create?
Oh, Chris, I did not create any, but my fiance created and recreated tons of Pinterest boards. So this week, we are talking about what's next. You bought your ring, you proposed, you got the yes, you're engaged, you enjoyed each other's company. But obviously, at some point, you are going to have to get married, and start the wedding planning process. So this is the time for you to decide what kind of wedding and event you want to have. And Chris, I'm sure you can relate to this, but there are a ton of decisions for you to make in this moment.
This is the beginning. This is the start of the mountain climb of wedding planning. So, I think this is when you're going to be sketching out your timeline, your budget, the whens and the wheres. So, try not to get overwhelmed. Just kind of this should be a very fun part of the process. It's just the beginning without any hard decisions yet. So it's time to break out those mood boards and start trying to think of the vision you want of your wedding, and that'll kind of help you along the process. How old you are, how fast you want to get married, how much you already have saved up for the wedding or don't have saved up for the wedding can help sketch out that timeline for you. Um, so I think one of the first things to think about is, everyone's favorite B word, budget. Start thinking about what your overall budget will be, and just know that that's going to change, right? As you start looking at different aspects of the wedding planning process. So just kind of have a fluid number, and then you can plan around that and see what happens.
Yeah, that number is definitely not locked in stone. I know if you Google like average wedding cost, pick a year, Zola will give you a number that shouldn't will not be accurate to you whatsoever because that number includes the cheapest weddings and the most expensive extravagant weddings. If you're in a big market like we are, Chris, in Chicago or DC, one of the major cities, all those costs will be higher versus if you're in like a smaller, more rural market, you will be able, not spend as much and get a similar quality.
Yep,
It all
suburbs
comes,
versus downtown.
yep. Suburbs versus downtown is a good example, exactly. Um, and in my case, overseas versus here, right? You may save a little bit on one part, but another area might be more expensive. So this is where you kind of, I actually think in this part, you maybe want to take a step back and
Hmm.
just kind of throw all your wants at it and just
Yep.
see like, maybe we can't afford a espresso martini tower, right? But hey, it'd be cool. Let's just put it in and see, like, hey, maybe we can afford, maybe we can't. I don't know. Maybe we can't afford to like rent out, 30 rooms at the Waldorf downtown for our wedding. But hey, it'd be nice. Let's just put it in and like see what happens. So this is kind of where you and your partner need to discuss like what is important to you and kind of narrow it down things that you both like, and then maybe things that one of you likes but the other one doesn't really care for, and then maybe things that like you like but maybe she doesn't, or vice versa. So those are things you can kind of cut. So Chris, when you guys started this, were there like any things that you both agreed had to happen? Like what was super important to you two?
Yeah, and ultimately, our podcast is hopefully giving a guy's perspective to the wedding planning process, and I think that weddings in general are maybe not top of mind for a lot of guys. I don't want to overgeneralize, but in our society, I think the pressure of having a vision for the wedding is mostly on the female partner of the relationship, and they may or may not have strong feelings or a vision of their wedding. And so that's something to be prepared about. This is something that you should be involved in. And even if you haven't really thought about it before, you should start going on Instagram and other social media sites and start looking up some follow some wedding influencers and see what you might like or what you don't like. Start. You should have an equal part of the vision of the wedding. And so just make sure you're involved. So even if you haven't thought about it before, now's the time to start digging in and have some ideas on what you want to see and what you want to have included in your wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. So now's the time to express them, you know? Um, I know for us, the first thing we kind of started talking about was actual timeline. When did we want to be married? And how long did we want to be engaged? Because I know for us, it's important that, we have kids, like we're planning on doing that, but we still want to be married first. However, like as you get older, you don't want to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years to do these kind of things because then it just gets harder and then you can potentially have less kids, right? So I know for us, the time between our engagement and our wedding date itself was it was anywhere from as short as 6 months to as long as a year and a half. Like we weren't really willing to be any longer than
Hmm.
that. So because that's our timeline that we set for ourselves, it really kind of um, limits is maybe not the right word, but it narrows down your choices of
It
realistically
focuses you.
what you can do. Yes, it forces you to focus. Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Um, when you're looking at a wedding that you have to plan within 6 months' time, you need to realize that that is a lot of work you got to do ASAP because you got to get invitations out to people. You got to talk to vendors. If you're planning on getting married at a church, you got to also plan that. Um, if you don't have all the funds it's going to cost you, you got to start saving. But if you're planning on getting married, let's say a year and a half in the future, well, then you have some time to send invitations out to people. So let's say they have to travel, you have to give them more time to, figure out their plans. So as soon as you kind of figure out realistically when you want to be married by, that's going to make all your other decisions easier and more realistic.
Yeah, I think trying to give yourself at least a year so that you have some flexibility to either go beyond that a little bit or shorten it, I think is important. As you said, like trying to plan a wedding in 5 or 6 months is going to be daunting unless you're more in the style of like I want a more informal wedding. I want it in someone's backyard. We're just going to do a big barbecue. No one really has to dress up. Most of our friends and family are in the area, and we can all just get together, on a Saturday and have a big party, right? You can probably throw that together a little bit faster than trying to do a big extravagant wedding with a lot of florals and color choices and design in it. So that's going to help kind of focus your decision, and depending on what you want to see and how fast you can execute it. I think some questions to think or ask yourselves is like what time of year do we want to have the wedding? Do we want to have it in fall, or maybe it's in spring, or it's in summer? And if it's in summer, do we do it indoors and outdoors? Depending on where you are, that could be feasible or not. It might be
Hmm.
110 out, or a balmy 75. So um, just kind of think about what you want your overall aesthetic of the wedding to be, and that will help also formulate your plans. Like, yeah, exactly, like how formal is it, right? Is it going to be black tie, or is it going to be like a garden party, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good thing to consider, right? What the other thing to add is, let's say you are wanting to get married in the summer. Um, it might be that all your favorite venues are booked.
Hmm.
So if you're looking, let's say 6 months out, Chris, I know you guys looked at a lot of venues, and I'm sure you noticed that maybe you had one that you loved that, hey, on this date they weren't available. Because it's summer, everyone wants to get married in the summer. Beautiful weather, you could be outside. Like that does limit you if you're on a time crunch.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were looking at a downtown Chicago, and we didn't know exactly what kind of venue we wanted. There's hundreds to choose from,
Yeah.
and of all different sorts, and different aspects, and different locations, that have pluses and minuses. And we started reaching out to some venues to schedule tours with some tentative dates about 12 to 14 months after we got engaged. And some of them had reached out saying those dates are already taken, or they started getting proposals for those dates, and to come soon. So, even a year out, I think people are planning their weddings further and further out. So you have to start thinking about it maybe a little sooner than you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. So timeline is huge. If you want to have a wedding on, so you have to consider if you want to have a small or large wedding. If
Hmm.
you want to have a smaller wedding, maybe your timeline is not as important. You may not need as much time to find the perfect venue. But once you start getting larger, let's say 100, 200 people, it's possible that your favorite venues are already filled,
Yep.
within the
Limits
next
your
6, 7
choices.
months. Yeah, it limits your choices quite a bit. And then you also have to consider, are all your guests from around town? Do they have to travel from the suburbs, from a different state, from a different country? If you have a big potential wedding, like guest list that, let's say, Chris, we're in Chicago. Let's say you have a big guest list from California, you know, you need to give those guests time to plan their travel because they need accommodations. They may need a car. They need to maybe take off from work. Planning a wedding in 6 months may not be enough time for something like that.
Yeah, and some other things to potentially help you is, whether you want to hire a planner or not. And I know we'll get into more details in later episodes, but there's generally three types of wedding planners that you could consider. There's full, partial, and day of. And just, you know, obviously your budget can help dictate whether you're hiring a planner and the amount of detail that you want in your wedding. But those people are professionals, and they can be a lifesaver to make sure that they keep you on track, and probably will ask you a lot of questions that you never even thought about, to help kind of make the day go smooth. So a full planner generally will make decisions for you once you've kind of shared your mood boards, and will kind of be responsible for hiring the vendors and the venue, and obviously with your approval. But they're going to take the lead in a lot of the decision making. There's partial planning, which is they'll get involved, maybe be able to offer vendor like 3 to 5 vendors that will fit your needs and your budget. You'll be responsible for interviewing them. They can be involved in that process, and but ultimately you're making the decision on who you hire. And of course, you can bring in other people that they don't recommend.
Yeah.
Um,
I will just say on that, you don't have to make this decision right now. It's possible you get started on your wedding planning a month in and you're just getting overwhelmed, and then maybe
mhm.
you bring in a planner. And then, Chris, I think it's great that you brought this up because what I will say about planners is as you feel like your wedding is getting more and more elaborate and bigger, I feel like the value that a planner provides starts really showing itself. Um, because you just have a lot more to think about. You have a lot more to, keep track of. You have a lot more vendors to coordinate with. You just have bigger numbers, which they are professionals. This is what they do. So they could definitely help alleviate the load. Something smaller, I don't know if you need it, but like as you get bigger, I definitely think it's something to at least consider.
That's a great point. Like as the wedding gets more complex, the value of the planner goes up, and I think that's a great rule to think about.
Yeah. So, okay. So you two have talked about your timeline, like realistic, what's not realistic. If you want to have a small wedding, large wedding, medium sized wedding, and these numbers kind of change. Chris, I don't know what your definition of each is. Like for me, I think under 100 is small, but then again, in my culture, like I'm used to going to weddings that have like 300 or 400 people.
Hmm. Hmm. All the villages come out.
Just literally, yeah, yeah, every village.
Yeah, I think, yeah, under 100, maybe under 75 is considered small. I would say average nowadays is probably between 100 to 150.
Hmm.
And when you start getting into that 200 range, that's when people start going, "Oh, you're having a large wedding."
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, you are inflating that budget to accommodate all of those people.
Oh, absolutely. And then once you do kind of figure that out, you got to ask yourself, is getting married in church important to you? You know, or are you okay with just like a courthouse wedding? Because I know for me, for us personally, like getting married in church is important to me. And that is something that my fiance was okay with, you know, even though it wasn't her religion. Um, but that does take extra planning. That does take extra time. You do have to meet with the church. You know, you have to meet with a priest. You have to set up time for that. It is one extra thing that you do need to plan. So if that is something that is important to you that you are going to be doing, again, 6 months, maybe the church is not available, right? You might have to extend out the engagement to accommodate all these extra things you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different priorities you need to think about for that day. So I just want to reiterate a couple just to summarize a little bit. Like think of the venue and the vibe of your venue. You don't have to have the exact one nailed down, but think about, do you want barn house chic, or do you need like a warehouse, or um, or something a little bit more elegant.
And just
Um,
real quick, Chris, before
yeah.
I think it's a great. I just want to add, I love bar house weddings. I I had never been to one like I don't know 7 or 8 years ago. So first I was like, "It's at a barn house? How does it make any sense?" They are awesome,
They are
right?
fun.
They
They are
they
fun.
they feel a little bit more like relaxed. Like you could like let loose a little bit. You have the indoor outdoor spaces. You have a lot of room. It's just a lot of fun. And like whatever you're imagining your wedding as being, like maybe you just see it in like a traditional ballroom. Just know
Mhm.
that right now there are so many options for venues and people are doing some really cool things. So like don't go in closed off to all the
Mhm.
possibilities. Like I would never think barn wedding was cool. It was one of my favorite weddings. I loved it. There's just so many options now, and people are like turning so many spaces into wedding venues, and they're just doing such beautiful things with them.
Yeah. Yeah. You can Google search in wherever city, town, suburb that you might be in, and look at some creative spaces. And again, take the time, enjoy the process a little bit, and go take a quick tour. You never know if you may fall in love with something that you maybe never thought about. So, give it a chance. But like once you go to one or two of those like types, you can then either like check mark it like, yeah, this is for us, or maybe like, no, definitely do not want this. And then you don't have to see anymore, right? Like try to take some tours of venues that fall within certain buckets. So you have like your barn house kind of chic kind of venues. You have your hotel ballroom, and I'm sure there's a lot of other creative event spaces. Especially if you live in a major city. But lock down on a vibe, and then that way you can kind of narrow your choices a little bit. And then beyond the venue being a top priority, guest list, as we kind of just touched on, think about generally, again, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but you're just trying to ballpark how many people you're potentially inviting. And that will decide also where you potentially have your venue, because certain venues can only support a certain amount of people. And even if your venue can support a large amount of people, if you're only going to have 75 in a space that supports 200, it might look empty, and kind of barren. And you might have to spend more on florals, and it just might look a little weird. So you want to find the right venue for the guest list count that you have. And then again, just sketch out a budget. It's going to be a little fluid at this point, but just kind of ballpark that. And then as you're looking, you'll be able to see what fits and what doesn't fit within your budget. And then you'll be able to adjust like, oh, well, maybe we can spend some more, or no, maybe we need to cut back. And that'll kind of um, help you make some decisions in the future.
Yeah. And this is also the time to ask other people's opinions, um, to kind of get an idea of with a guest list, Chris, like ask your parents, like, hey, I mean, are there people that like we have to invite? You know, maybe ask any friends or siblings that have already gotten married, like, hey, you had this wedding. You know, what worked, what didn't? What did you spend money on that? You know, like you don't even remember like anyone caring about because there's gonna be so many decisions on you that your guests though do not see any of that. You
Hmm.
know, so you might be making a decision on napkin colors. Well, like no one cares. Like it might not be important. You never know. So ask people's opinions. However, I just will caveat that people will give you their opinions, um, and not all opinions are valid. So maybe just kind of like ask your family which guests are important to have. Ask any close friends or siblings that are already married, like what worked for them, what didn't, what they liked, what they thought was kind of a waste. And take those in so you can kind of start getting an idea of what you're going to be doing.
I think that's a great point and something that you need to think about. We're here to try to help you avoid landmines or at least see the landmines coming. So I think an important question to ask yourselves is how involved do we want our families in the planning process? Again, another sensitive topic with budget is are different families contributing different amounts? And if they're contributing to your wedding, they might want to say in certain decisions. So just kind of be aware that if family is helping to pay for the wedding, they may wish to be involved and may have that right to make some decisions if they're putting up significant funds for your special day.
Oh, Chris, I think may is the wrong word. I think it's will, you know? Cuz cuz to be fair, like if they're putting money down, like they should have a say. And they will. They will have opinions, they will kind of tell you what they like, what they don't like. And it's not to say that they're wrong. They've been through this, right?
Hmm.
They've seen tons of weddings. So don't just discount their opinion and just be annoyed by it, even though this will be a stressful time. Um, but just know that there are definitely like a lot of gems there that people will give you. Just choose who you want to listen to. You don't have to listen to everyone, but like I think listening to family, um, and then maybe as the wedding goes, you can kind of like filter some of that noise out. But yeah, definitely listen to them, see what they have to say. This it's only out of love and like a desire to help.
Yeah, and one other thing that I think will be important too, and when you're talking to your families, both sides, is also are there any, you had mentioned getting married in a church. Are there any cultural and religious traditions that need to be incorporated into the wedding? Especially if you're a mixed race couple. Are there different cultural traditions that you want to incorporate into the wedding that are going to be important to have on that day?
Yeah. Like for us, if you get married in a church, like there are expectations, which I know I briefly talked about in the timeline, but the more things you do, the more like cultural things you add, that is going to add time for you to figure out. It's like one extra piece of the puzzle. So be realistic with how much time you're giving yourselves. Don't rush it. The last thing you want to do is like have a set date and then try to make that date work no matter what. Like you might end up picking a venue you don't like just because it's available on the date you want, you know? Um, you might just make a decision with a vendor just because they're available on this date or that date. Like don't don't be wed to it and just be a little bit fluid if you can.
Yeah, this is the time just to kind of you're just spitballing. You're just kind of again putting together mood boards, seeing what you like or don't like in different magazines and social media sites, and then kind of collaborate with each other on what you seem to agree on, and then you can go in with a plan of action to start tackling all of these different aspects of the wedding day.
Yeah. And let's say you guys don't agree on something and it'll happen, obviously. Um, Pick your battles. There are certain things that like aren't worth like arguing about. Let's say she has like a flower that she loves that you don't care for. Like that's not a fight that's even worth having. You'll have plenty of other things to argue about. You don't need to have everything be an argument. Let Give her some wins, she'll give you some wins. So that way the wedding kind of, everyone is kind of happy with it.
Yeah, and also just from a guy's perspective, again, a lot of the mental load is kind of expected to be taken up by if there's a female partner here. Just be prepared to tackle some of these projects and make some of these decisions yourself, and have an opinion so that you have the stamp on your day. It's equally part both your days. So um, just make sure you're collaborating with each other and get involved.
Chris, I kind of, as you're saying this, I'm kind of wondering, do you think like the stereotype of like the girl plans everything is just because the guy doesn't have an opinion? So like she like has to, like I am wondering about that. Because I know for like decorations, like my fiance is definitely taking lead on it, but like she's asking like, hey, do you like these colors? Do you like these flowers? Like she's bringing me in the loop on it. Um, but I know like when it comes to design, like I'm definitely gonna trust her judgment on it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think just culturally, a lot of these questions on this day is, thought about from the female perspective a lot more than the guys. You very rarely hear anyone talk, a guy talk about their dream wedding. Um, so I think it might be that they just haven't thought long and hard about any of these decisions or what goes into a wedding, and so they have no strong opinions, and so they just let their partner take the lead. Which, if that's your relationship and that's what's working, then that's fine. But I would suggest that you take onus and you take some decision making off their plate.
Yeah. Chris, is there anything that you really wanted to have at your wedding?
Oh, uh this is hard to discuss ahead of time, because I feel like I have to keep some surprises. So maybe that'll be in a later episode or in our episodes after we have our wedding, so that I can keep the surprises.
Yeah, the postmortems. I guess I thought my mind. I know for me, I really wanted a um overseas wedding. So we're getting married in Greece. Um, and I know that my fiance, she hadn't really like thought about it before, and I was lucky that when we went to Greece in June, she fell in love with the island, which kind of brought her on board to the idea that hey, maybe this will be really nice. Because for me, like it would be easy for like my family to get to. I think it's beautiful. I think the way weddings are done in Europe are just so much fun, Versus because I used to be a waiter at a banquet hall, so I would see like weddings every weekend, and they were all very similar, But like seeing in Europe, it's just different, so it just feels unique and fun to me. So I know that was important to me, and I'm glad that she agreed.
Yeah, just talking generalities, I think for us, we wanted something that was a little bit more elegant,
Hmm.
something that was very important to me. I feel that is overlooked a lot at weddings for various reasons, but food. Food was high on my list, and that was one of the reasons why I think ultimately we didn't go with a hotel ballroom
Uh huh.
for our wedding, is because I feel like a lot of hotels do a lot of amazing dishes and food for weddings, but I just feel like overall, every hotel ballroom wedding that I've ever been to has had forgettable food. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess that's maybe good because it's not bad, right? If it was really bad, you remember it. But I think food was important. For us, at least, was providing an open bar. We want to make sure everyone has, drinks on hand that they want to drink, and that everyone's taken care of in that regard, and that we have really good music.
Yeah, the important things, the trifecta: booze, food, music.
Exactly.
That's what makes everyone happy. That's what people remember. As long as that's flowing, people will have a good time.
Hmm.
And Chris, food, I can't agree with you more on it. Like I know when we were although for me, like I have a thing where the most important thing at a wedding lately that I've seen is the after wedding snack. Like they bring out like pizza or hot dogs, burgers,
The
whatever,
best.
at
The
like 10
best.
o'clock, after you've been dancing for 3 hours. And when we were talking to our vendors in Greece, I was like, hey, this food is great, but uh can we talk about how we can get some souvlaki here at like 2 a.m. Like what are we this is what's most important to me. So yeah, restaurants, a lot of venues are opening up their space and you have some fantastic food options.
I think the food scene for weddings has gotten so much better in recent years. It's also going to be one of your biggest costs,
Yeah.
per person. So you just have to find the right balance between, um, the food quality and the food cost, as always.
But yeah, these are just some of the things that you need to think about now. Again, you don't have to make any decisions, but just know that you got to figure out realistically what is your timeline? How much time do you have? If you have, you know, 12, 18 months, you can probably, plan something a little bit more extravagant because you have time to figure it out, time to save. Do you have 6 months? Then maybe you need to think that, hey, maybe you should plan something a little smaller. Do you have a lot of family pressure to invite 300 people? Well, that's annoying. But a way to alleviate that is, hey, maybe you want to do an overseas wedding, realizing that a lot of those people aren't going to be able to come. Um, so you just got to kind of figure out what you want to get done. Talk with your partner. She will definitely have ideas, right? She will, if there are things you don't know, trust me, she will let you know. Um, and kind of fill you in on these things. But this is where you kind of build the outline of your wedding. I wouldn't worry so much about what it costs now. Just kind of put it out
Mhm.
there, and then you can see if okay, well, this is fun, but it's obscenely expensive. Like we don't need it.
Mhm.
Just throw it on the wall. See if it sticks. You never know.
Yeah, that's great. I think hopefully we provided a lot of food for thought for our listeners, and in the next episodes, we'll start getting down into the weeds in wedding planning, and hopefully provide some good food for thought for how to get that special day off the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Well said, Chris. So thanks for hanging out, everyone. Thanks for listening, Chris. I'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Thanks. Bye.